good to see you.
Yes.
Different part of the world this time.
It is. First time we've seen each other.
I don't know how long it's been. RSA, I guess.
RSA, I think it's the last time we saw. But yeah.
Which is a decent distance back.
Yeah, a few months ago.
And the next one's coming up, but we're not talking about RSA.
No.
They did have an RSA CISO boot camp yesterday. I don't know if you were able to attend that or not.
No, I wasn't able to attend
So
that.
evidently a bunch of CISOs got together and had the CISO talk.
All right, great.
I'm not allowed in those. They don't let me in. But here we are, Australia Cyber Conference in Melbourne, hosted by AISA.
Yeah.
Your first time in Australia, your first time at the conference?
Yes,
What
first
do you
time
make of
at the conference, So I really, it's quite good to see the real spread of different interesting talks that are happening here. Lots of talks on the same theme. Well, there's lots of themes, but they've got quite a few talks on each theme, which is really interesting. Some interesting talks. I went to a really good one this morning. Is it Lingo? I'm pronouncing that wrong. All about building inclusion into cyber, which is really diversity inclusion. And it was really about outreach to different communities to get them to engage with cyber as a topic. I thought that was really fascinating. So, it seems like a really exciting conference. So.
Yeah, and the one thing that I like about, well, lots of things that I like about being here, but AISA is a member-driven organization, and so it seems they invest a lot into the community around Australia, bringing more folks in, enabling and supporting people that are in the industry, giving them the opportunity to participate in a conference like this. And in Canberra, I think it's a little more government focused, but just very very human.
It is,
driven for many, many years, which is really cool.
And I happen to be in my hotel with somebody I know who happens to run the AISA Perth, chair AISA Perth chapter, and saying exactly the same thing. And you could see the community there of a lot of people chatting to each other. That's always when we do really well in this industry, isn't it? When we really get together as a community, and it's great to see that. And in terms of the way they're really thinking about topics and environment and avoiding people doing too much selling unless it's on the exhibition floor, making sure that they're actually sharing insights. But I think making sure that in the talks is about sharing insights and things that are going to help and community talking to each other. It's really good.
So what I don't know, so you said you got a session this morning. Are there any topics or themes that you've been following the last number of months that you see kind of transfer here and being discussed here?
So there's one which the talk I just gave actually, which is there's about 4 different sessions on it, which is really good, which is really, mine was net zero on cyber, but it's really about that carbon impact of AI and analytics, but then also about the need to secure all the stuff we're going to do renewable technology and OT security and all those environments. And that's OT security has been around for a long time and people have been talking about it, but it really feels this year that people are beginning to realise how important it is, particularly with that. We've done the easy stuff in net zero now, we now got to do the hard stuff. And with that drive to renewables really does mean more OT. Also, you've got more regulation like in Europe, the NIS2 directive in the UK bringing in their new version of the critical national infrastructure security. Just seeing that realisation from a regulatory perspective of the impact of something going wrong in that OT environment. So although we've been talking about it for a long time, it does feel like we're at that tipping point at the moment where actually thinking about industrial control system security is essential.
Now you raise an interesting point. I don't think you're saying this specifically, but it's in my head now. And I'll connect it to kind of the ESG. So for years, decades now, we talk about, or have talked about security as the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. A lot of focus in recent years on confidentiality with privacy and GDPR and those types of things. Some integrity when we start talking about health records and financial records and things like that. Availability seems to have kind of fallen off and maybe it's just transferred to IT and security doesn't think about it too much, or I don't hear the stories.
In the OT world, it's all about availability, isn't it? And I think if you think about as we go through digital transformation and we rely completely on technology to run our businesses, then actually availability is much more important in our world than we think about it. All you have to do is think about any of the high-profile outages we've had this year, and I'm not going to name any names.
Right.
But if you think about them, whatever the cause, whether it was an update or an infrastructure issue, the impact that had on the real world, because there is almost no business now that doesn't rely on technology. That's the side effect of digital transformation. Right. And so literally, yes, we think about availability being an OT thing, but actually it's an everybody thing.
Yeah.
And I'd actually go in the integrity world, there's a data integrity. In a world of AI and large language models, that integrity's got to include provenance. So not only is it the right data, but do I know where it came from?
Yep.
So that's probably might be the CIAP triangle in a few years.
Right. Provenance as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for me the connection to ESG is not just binary. Is it available or is it offline? Did we mess up? But it's a scale of performance.
Yes.
How much resources are we using to get the value out of it? We look at blockchain, right? How much money are we spending to mine coins and all that kind of stuff? And when we start looking at AI and OT,
that's the key thing I was talking about. If you look at AI, particularly large language models and analytics, the environmental cost of that, the carbon footprint, environmental models. And there's a slide I've got for some research done by PwC and Microsoft, which if you look at the average human life is 11,000 pounds of CO2 a year to run. The average American about 36,000, because you're a little bit more carbon heavy than the rest of us.
You're like our Hummers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then it's something like 166,000 to train a model. So it's you just think about that even higher expansion. I remember that start off the top of my head, so I might have been wrong. I think it might even be higher than that. And that's the reality: is everyone's going, let's use, and they're talking about large language models are going to kill search, but it's probably I think something up to 1,000 times more carbon intensive to do an AI generated search than a straight up traditional search. So it's all that whole about green by design.
Who cares about that?
Who's going to? No one's cared so far. Well, actually, I tell you what, I was talking a lot from the Microsoft side, because obviously the hyperscalers care because that costs them money to do the training. So A and GPUs.
But they just pass that on, though, don't they?
Yeah, or if you actually look at what they're trying to do, because they were trying to keep the cost down and actually hit their sustainability targets, they're trying to do things like demand shifting and time shifting and moving it to where they've got more green energy available, and that's what hyperscaler can do. But if you're doing it locally,
right?
It's all that thing about, we're talking about secure by design. We almost need to be secure by design and green by design at the same time,
right?
And and all of this is going to rely on OT. Because it's all about renewable energy, which relies on OT.
And we were talking to, of course, Abbas, we were speaking with him earlier, we were talking about sovereignty.
Yes.
So you might be hamstrung in terms of where you can put some of these things, where maybe some countries might have some carbon to give, but if your sovereignty laws say no, then you may not be able to.
So maybe what you do is you have the whole international smart grid to pull the energy off them, but even within a country, so say within Australia, you might say it's really sunny in Perth. Let's move things to the Perth data centre, and then it's windy and rainy in Melbourne, which it's actually not now, but it was yesterday.
It's cleared.
Yeah, but let's use the I don't know if they've got wind farms here, but that whole idea of even within a country, you can move it to whichever data centre's got the best mix of power at any point.
If we can harness the fog, we would have done great.
Exactly, exactly.
So clearly you get to work with a lot of large organizations who are forward-thinking and mature. ESG still a thing? Because it was a big thing, I heard, at least a year or so back. It hasn't been much on the radar for myself anyway in the last year. It's
still required in people's annual reports where we are. I suspect it's going to become less of a thing in certain parts of the world without saying too much. But having said that, in a world where power is getting more expensive, you don't have to be about ESG to be thinking about how can I do things in the most efficient way possible, and sustainability. And as much as we might politically decide not to do it, the reality is there's been more climate emergencies this year than in any year. We've got to look at the floods in Spain, even the floods here in Australia, and they're becoming these once in a lifetime events are now becoming once every 2 or 3 year events,
right.
And that's the reality. So whether ESG is on the current political listing or not, thinking about how do we do things most sustainably is about actually how do I run my business and what I'm trying to do in the most cost effective manner, the most efficient manner, but also in a way that maybe allows us to carry on for a little bit longer.
It's a security story all again.
Yeah, right? It's exactly the same thing.
Do we protect for the value of being secure? Do we protect because we have a regulation we have to adhere to?
That's the challenge. So obviously regulation's driving it. I do think with where power costs are in the world, right, doing things as efficient as you are, but it's not even an ESG decision. It's a save money decision. Always
comes back to the pound and the dollar.
Exactly.
At some point.
Exactly.
What else is top of mind for you? I'm sure AI. You talked about OT. But are there other things that?
I mean, obviously. I mean, if you think about in the world at the moment, there's probably 3 major trends. So there's like the idea of disruption as usual being the norm. So I was in a meeting with the Bank of England and they said like the next 10 years, we're not going to get back to business as usual. It's going to continue being disruption as usual. Think about that in the digital world. That's digital disruption as usual, which is good in the way that that's lots of new digital stuff going on.
Managed chaos.
Yeah. Bad in the way that it's not a very stable geopolitical, socio-technical environment across the world at the moment, so economic environment. So from a point of view of what we've got to do, it's like how do I harness new technology in the best way possible, most securely I can, but in a world where long-term investment is all very difficult and funding and things like that. Yeah, the next one is that global regulatory landscape just exploding because all that digital disruption, people being worried about it, and whatever's going to happen in certain parts of the world about whether they're going to have regulation or not. Obviously, your part of the world, whether they might roll back regulation. The reality is that everywhere in the world is regulating. And I think, so Gartner said something a couple of years ago that really struck home to me, that there's more people in the world that are now subject to privacy regulation than actually have access to clean water. And that's, whether they actually appeal or plead with it, but that's the reality we got. And then obviously the cyber threat's not going away. And obviously that expanding and growing cyber threats, so one of the things my threat intelligence team are here with me this week talking about that. And then we think, oh great, the cyber threat's driving, that's going to drive investment, but it's almost like it's becoming endemic now. And when anything becomes endemic, it becomes more BAU. Right. So it's like, it's less fear and certainty now. So if you think about, even going through like COVID and the pandemic, it was all big, when it was a pandemic, it was lots of big reactions depending on where in the world, and now it's endemic and people are still catching it, people are still getting sick, but it's just part of life, and there's a different level of investment that goes at those levels. And I think we're probably at that point now where yes, the cyber threat is rapidly rising and increasing, but actually it is endemic, which is why cyber resilience is such an important topic at the moment. In it, it's talked about from a regulatory perspective, but actually just think about it in a world where there's digital disruption, everything's changing, there's a growing regulation and a cyber threat's growing. That's why resilience is so important, because you've just got to be able to build your business to carry on and operate. And there's business resilience, and then cyber being a key part of that. Not let me have a big, massive investment and program right now. It's almost part of the maturing of our industry, isn't it, really, as we invest.
I'm glad you went there, because I was going to ask you, back at RSA, and even for a few months following, there was a lot of conversation around resilience.
Yeah.
And with a focus on cyber resilience, but then an expansion to business resilience. And so for me, I'm a risk guy. I like to look at things from a risk perspective, and it's not just cyber risk, it's business risk, and how do we mitigate that? How do we respond when something bad happens? Do you see, and I mean, obviously we're going to see shifts in policies, shifts in global positions on different things. My sense is if you're a mature organization and think about risk in the right way and resilience in the right way, you can maneuver your operations and the way you manage the organization to where those things flow. If you're not looking at it, if you're too myopic, you might be off the mark and not be able to ride that wave.
And it's always the challenge is like, even with any cyber incident, if you're large enough, you'll probably survive it. And if you're small enough, you maybe haven't got the cash flow to get through the incident.
Right.
So it's the same principle. And I think that's why resilience is important. And even from a small organisation, it's like you're not going to be able to spend 90% of the money you make on cyber, but you don't need to. It's about making sure you're thinking about the risk and investing in the right place to be most resilient. And if that's following a government standard or something like that helps you, that's great, as long as you don't just tick the checkbox without thinking about, is this actually helping me reduce my exposure?
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's going to be interesting times ahead.
It is very interesting.
Interesting times.
Yeah.
And then of course there's all what your team looks at, all the threat, which is a whole other game. Maybe we can chat about that at another time, but we're just trying to survive, and then we have the bad actor having fun with us too. So good times ahead. Well, it's always a pleasure, Sean, to see you. And this time down under, maybe back in San Francisco.
I'll
be after the new year anyway.
Yes, hopefully. Yes, definitely.
But fabulous chatting with you. Always good to see you.
Great, good to see you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
And thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks.
And please connect with Sian John, super smart obviously, and stay tuned for more episodes here coming to you from AU CyberCon in Melbourne.